What's wrong with the youths today? Some just kill them, no pray, and soon I'ma fade away. Love where we are, that's what we need. Don't get me started with it.
Global warming, but it's been going on for about 200 years. Also, there have been several periods, like the last 10 years, when the warming has ceased. In fact, there's been a little bit of cooling over the past 10 years. There have even been periods of substantial cooling, for example, from 1940 to 1970. You could see that on Dr. Pachauri's chart. Atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide have increased from about 280 to 380 parts per million over the past 100 years. The combustion of fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gases contributed to this increase in the atmosphere. Finally, increasing concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere will cause some warming of the Earth's surface. The key question is, will the net effect of the warming and any other effects of CO2 be good or bad for humanity? I believe the increase of CO2 will be good. I predict that future historians will look back on this period much as we now look back on the period just before we passed the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to prohibit the manufacturing, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors. At the time, the 18th Amendment seemed to be exactly the right thing to do. It was the 1917 version of saving the planet from the ravages of climate change. More than half the states enacted prohibition laws before the 18th Amendment was finally ratified. Only one state, Rhode Island, voted against, and my hat's off to the senator from Rhode Island. I'm sorry he's not here. Well, there were many people who thought that prohibition might do more harm than good, but they were completely outmatched by the temperance movement, whose motives and methods had much in common with the movement to stop climate change. Deeply sincere people thought they were saving humanity from the evils of alcohol, just as many people now sincerely think they're saving humanity from the evils of CO2. Prohibition was a mistake, and our country's probably still not fully recovered from the damage it did. For example, institutions like organized crime got their start in that era. Drastic limitations on CO2 are likely to damage our country in an analogous way. There's tremendous opportunity for corruption there. There's little argument in the scientific community that the direct effect of doubling CO2 concentrations will be a small increase in the Earth's temperature on the order of 1 degree centigrade. That's not enough to worry about. Further increases will cause even less. To get the scary scenarios that we hear about, water vapor and clouds must amplify the direct effects of CO2. In fact, observations suggest that water vapor and clouds actually diminish the already small global warming expected from CO2, not amplify it. The evidence comes from satellite measurements of infrared radiation escaping from the Earth into outer space, from measurements of the sunlight reflected from clouds, and from measurements of the temperature of the Earth's surface. I keep hearing about the pollutant CO2, or about poisoning the atmosphere with CO2. CO2 is not a pollutant. It's not a poison, and we should not corrupt the English language by depriving pollutant and poison of their original meaning. When we exhale, each of us here, our exhaled breath is 4% CO2. That's about 40,000 parts per million, 100 times the current atmospheric concentrations. CO2 is absolutely essential for life. Commercial greenhouse operators often use CO2 as a fertilizer to improve the health and growth rate of their plants. Plants in our own primate ancestors evolved when the levels of atmospheric CO2 were about 1,000 parts per million, a level we'll probably not reach by burning fossil fuels. By the way, the oceans did just fine then at 1,000 parts per million. There was no problem with acidification, and lots of coral reefs grew very vigorously. We're all aware that the green revolution has increased crop yields around the world. Part of this wonderful development comes from improved crop varieties, better use of mineral fertilizers, herbicides, etc. But no small part of the yield improvement has come from increased atmospheric levels of CO2. If we decrease our current levels of CO2 to those that prevailed a few hundred years ago. I don't know how we'd do that, but if we did, we'd lose part of the Green Revolution, and the Green Revolution has yet to run its course if we let CO2 continue to go up. I often hear there's a consensus behind the idea of impending disaster from climate change, that already it may be almost too late to avert this catastrophe, even if we stop burning fossil fuels. Well, first, what's correct in science is not determined by consensus, but by experiment, observation, testing. I can't think of any other branch of science where an international organization is needed to determine the truth. This is the first time this has ever happened. Secondly, I don't think there is a consensus about an impending climate crisis. Like the temperance movement 100 years ago, the climate catastrophe movement has enlisted the mass media, leadership of scientific societies, trustees of charitable foundations, many other influential people to their cause. Even elementary school teachers and writers of children's books terrify our children with the idea of impending climate doom. Children should not be force-fed propaganda masquerading as science. Many of you know that in the year 2007, a British court ruled that if Al Gore's book, An Inconvenient Truth, was used in British public schools, the children had to be told of 11 particularly troubling inaccuracies. For example, the court ruled it was not possible to attribute Hurricane Katrina to CO2. Indeed, if we had taken a small fraction of the many billions of dollars that we spend on climate change research and propaganda and fixed the dikes and pumps around New Orleans, there would have been no disaster. I regret that climate change issues have become confused with serious problems like secure energy supplies, protecting our environment, and figuring out where future generations will get energy or chemical feedstocks after we've burnt all the fossil fuel we can find. I hope we don't confuse these laudable goals with hysterics about carbon footprints. I hope Congress will choose to promote investment in technology that addresses real problems and scientific research that will help us cope with these real problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So this morning, both players are here, Coleman and the CEO of the Weather Channel, David Kenny. First, let me bring in John Coleman. He's in San Diego this morning. Thank you for being here.
It's nice to be on CNN. Hello to all your viewers. I resent you calling me a denier. That is a word meant to put me down. I'm a skeptic about climate change, and I want to make it darn clear, Mr. Kenny's not a scientist. I am. He's the CEO of the Weather Channel now. I was the founder of the Weather Channel, not the co-founder.
And I'm glad you did, because I am addicted to the Weather Channel. I watch a lot of cable news.
Now, hold on just a minute. I'm not done. And CNN has taken a very strong position on global warming that it is a consensus. Well, there is no consensus in science. Science isn't a vote. Science is about facts. And if you get down to the hard, cold facts, there's no question about it. Climate change is not happening. There is no significant man-made global warming now. There hasn't been any in the past, and there's no reason to expect any in the future. There's a whole lot of baloney, and yes, it has become a big political point of the Democratic Party and part of their platform, and I regret it's become political instead of scientific, but the science is on my side.
I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion about the topic right here. What I do wonder, though, is when you see...
because you wouldn't allow it to happen on CNN, but I'm happy that I got on the air and got a chance to talk to your viewers. Hello, everybody. There is no global warming.
What I do wonder is when you see the government, when you see NASA, when you see other institutions say that 97% of climate scientists agree, do you think they're making it up? What I don't understand is how you square that.
Well, that's a manipulated figure, and let me explain it to you. The government puts out about $2.5 billion directly for climate research every year. It only gives that money to scientists who will produce scientific results that support the global warming hypothesis of the Democrat Party position. So they don't have any choice. If you're going to get the money, you got to support their position. Therefore, 97% of the scientific reports published support global warming.
Sometime in the next week, Parliament will vote on probably the greatest tax change in your life. It's a carbon dioxide tax to make us cut the gases we're told are heating the world dangerously. It's a tax on coal-fired electricity that will raise billions of dollars a year and probably cost thousands of jobs. That's a huge call. So, to see if it makes sense, we're going to do exactly what Julia Gillard has told us to do.
Addressing climate change all starts with the science. The government accepts the science.
We are going to start with the science, and we've asked prominent Australian scientists to help explain it for us in an extended panel session on the 4 big questions about global warming. Emeritus Professor Garth Paltridge was a Chief Research Scientist for the CSIRO Division of Atmospheric Research. Peter Reid is Professor of Marine Physics at James Cook University, and his research has included monitoring coral reefs. Professor Bob Carter of James Cook University is a marine geologist and co-editor of the just-published Non-Governmental Panel on Climate Change Interim Report. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. The first question is, are humans warming the planet? And is Julia Gillard right?
Our climate is changing. This is caused by carbon pollution.
Bob, climate changing? Caused by humans?
Yes, of course, and the difficulty here is the unspoken words. Climate always changes. That's the missing agenda, and every climate scientist knows this. Nothing unusual about climate change. The idea that somehow climate was stable until the Industrial Revolution and our carbon dioxide emissions is simply silly. But in saying climate is changing and we will accept the science, the Prime Minister is agreeing with you, agreeing with us. We all accept the science, but which science? And the issue is, to what degree are human carbon dioxide emissions making extra changes to climate on top of the natural changes? That's the key question.
Garth, it seems to me that she's saying, and the change is caused by carbon pollution, she's saying it's all done by humans.
Well, that's pushing things rather too far. I mean, the short answer to the question as to whether carbon dioxide is going to increase the temperature of the world, the short answer, and the misleading answer, is yes. The trouble is that you are really concerned with how much change is going to take place, and the scientists these days, the climate scientists, tend to vastly overstate the problems of an increasing temperature of the world due to carbon dioxide.
And I'm going to have a look at some of those other predictions they make about that. Peter, what also struck me is the use of the word pollution, carbon pollution. Can you tell us, are we talking carbon pollution? Are we talking carbon dioxide? Is carbon dioxide a pollutant?
Well, I mean, it's a natural gas, and it's important, it's in fact essential to plants, so it's actually stretching it a little bit to say it's pollution. But I guess if you do really believe that we're going to, you know, really cook up, then perhaps you could regard it as a correct usage of the term. But it is a bit stretching it, and sometimes you wonder whether it's been used as a sort of a media thing more than using it as a fact.
Yeah. Well, look, because I've just looked up the latest satellite data on my iPad of warming over the last 30 years, and it's about, as you can see, about a third of a degree. Is that really a big warming? Can Julia Gillard say that's caused by our gases?
No, I don't think there's any way we can do that. I mean, essentially all this boils down to looking at these big models that predict the climate, and when you look at the details, the uncertainties involved in those make it, in my view, that in fact they have no predictive value whatsoever, in fact.
All right, so when we're told that our climate is changing and this is caused by carbon pollution, the answer from scientists is, well, it's changing, but it always changes, and what warming we've seen, we're not sure that carbon pollution is the main driver of it, and pollution might be a loaded word. All right, so to question 2, is any warming dangerous? Now, again, I want to ask you, is Julia Gillard right?
We'll see more bushfires and drought. We'll see agricultural land in the Murray-Darling Basin no longer able to be used for agriculture. We'll see icons like the Great Barrier Reef threatened and Kakadu.
Peter, are we going to see all these disasters? Is the science telling us that all these disasters, bushfires, droughts, Great Barrier Reef, true?
Well, Great Barrier Reef, it's really strange, you know, because all the corals that live on the Great Barrier Reef already live in New Guinea, where the temperature is at least 1 or 2 degrees hotter. And in fact, they live in the Great Barrier Reef. In the Papua New Guinea, they grow faster and they're possibly more healthy as well. If there are temperature-stressed corals in Queensland, they're in Moreton Bay because it's too cold. Corals like it hot, essentially. In addition to that, it's also not well known that in fact the sea level has fallen on the Great Barrier Reef in the last 5,000 years, and this has killed a lot of the corals because they're now exposed at low tide. If in addition to global warming we get a sea level rise, as is the prediction, there'll be a massive explosion of corals on these areas that are now actually dead.
Are you telling me we're going to get more corals?
I don't think there's any doubt we'll have more corals.
Peter, you must be wrong, because I have consulted Ulf Goldberg and the alarmist David Suzuki, and have a look what they say. They say there's been a devastating effect so far from warming on the reef already.
At the moment, there's probably little doubt that this is our first major sign of a change in the tropics because of global warming.
I was shocked. I mean, in that short time, from 88 to 2004, there are very, very perceptible changes.
Bob, Peter says he's not convinced about the corals. He's not seeing it.
What about the rising sea levels and all that kind of stuff?
I find it hard to keep a straight face watching David Suzuki and Professor Goldberg say those things. There's absolutely no doubt what Peter has said is right. Corals grow up, and they are controlled by the shallow water ones to average sea level. If average sea level is rising, and it is at the moment on the Queensland coast, and it will continue to do so, that is good for the Great Barrier Reef. If, and it's a very big if, and I don't think it'll happen, but if human warming was enough that it accentuated that sea level rise, then the corals would do even better. Score 100 Peter Reid, 0 David Suzuki.
Not doing very well here, so I'm going to ask question 3 of Garth. And again, the question this time, question 3 is the science settled? And again, is Julia Gillard right? When she says only a few mad conservative journalists, I wonder who she's talking about, disagree with the global warming scientists.
I ask, who would I rather have on my side? Alan Jones, Piers Ackerman and Andrew Bolt? Or the CSIRO, the Australian Academy of Science, the Bureau of Meteorology, NASA, the US National Atmospheric Administration and every reputable climate scientist in the world?
Garth, you work with the CSIRO, and she says all these institutions are against a few crazies like me.
Yes, well, that's, again, rather overstating the case. I mean, there are vast quantities of scientists who at least question the concept of man-made global warming. It is true that the ones that go public are usually scientists either who have retired or who come from other disciplines.
Nothing to lose.
They've got nothing to lose. But in this day and age, it can be fairly dangerous to one's career if you are a climate scientist and express some vociferous objection to the concept of dangerous global warming.
Well, in fact, I thought you made an interesting point, Peter, because you sent a letter to the chief scientist, Ian Chubb, saying, why don't you ensure that funding goes to sceptics as it goes to warmers who get billions?
Yes, I think this is very important because, you know, in our court system we have a prosecution, we have a defence, and by making the two sides argue, we can get to the truth, hopefully. And the defence side in a court case, actually their sole job is to try to find problems with the opposition argument. Now in science at the moment we only hear one side, and one side is funded. The other side is not funded, so we have a situation where in fact it's like a court case in China, and therefore the public actually can't have a great deal of faith in science at the moment. We need scientific reform, in fact, before we go and do things to our economy.
Right, I think that
it contributes to the groupthink. But let's go to question 4 because we're running out of time. Will Julia Gillard's tax actually work? By how much will the carbon dioxide tax cut the world's temperature? Or is Gillard right when she says that is an impossible question?
To what extent will the carbon tax reduce average global temperatures? Well, this is a question that first put into the public debate, I believe, by Andrew Bolt, and it's a question not capable of answer because it assumes other countries aren't acting.
True or false? Is that a question incapable of answer, Bob?
Well, you have to use a computer model to answer it, and so it's a highly inaccurate answer. But any computer model, and there are different estimates, you end up with fractions of 10,000ths of a degree of warming averted for a 5% cut in Australia.
In Australia, because we've actually asked or got from 3 scientists some estimates of what the temperature would be. They range from about 4,000th of a degree if we went through and cut to 1/20,000th of a degree. Would you quarrel with those estimates, Garth?
No, they're in the ballpark, but because we're relying on models, we can't be exact on it, but roughly.
Essentially
right.
zero, Peter?
Yes, essentially zero. However, I mean, one of the arguments is that by cutting our own, then we have some sort of moral high ground to pretend that the Chinese and the Indians are going to cut theirs. I think that's the argument that they're using, in fact.
Well, gee, it doesn't seem to have gone too well for Julia Gillard. The scientists tell if they listen to them, a lot of what she claims is the basic facts about the global warming science seem false. Thank you.
8. Climate Research Unit emails. Is global warming one of the biggest threats to humanity, or just a big hoax? You might come to believe the latter if you read the emails WikiLeaks posted from the University of East Anglia's Climate Research Unit. The hacked emails show that climate scientists have been engaged in manipulating data to support their position that global warming is real, man-made, and getting worse. One email referring to a report in a scientific journal stated, "I've just completed the trick of adding in the real temps to each series for the last 20 years and from 1961 for Keiths to hide the decline in temperature." In the wake of the scandal, the head of the unit stepped down. The scandal was described by some as the worst scientific scandal of our generation.